off the day here at Staris 2023. And we will be starting a discussion, very heated, I foresee, around performance testing, modern performance challenges from these, changing times, because we are facing lots of things with services, microservices, all the new methodologies, CI/CD, and who knows, maybe we can start getting into thorny things like ChatGPT and things like. I see faces contorting already. But I would say first topic that I actually was a great coincidence, because was like right away that question. I'm like, I chose it right. Why performance? Why is it important? Why should we be caring about? And one very interesting that I'm gonna see what perspectives do you have, how to convince management, because that is usually a key indicator, without falling into, we already had a situation, big problem, now management cares. Before that, right? Because that's usually the path. Again, audience, everyone here, if you want to contribute, collaborate, enter the fight, and jump up here and start, feel free to. But who wants to go first? Convincing and the importance.
I can go.
Fernando, I see you.
All right, I'll start.
Wait, sorry, my bad. I have here Theron, expert in performance. Fernando,
Not an expert in performance.
but giving talks on performance, believe it or not. But it's important you understand some of the concepts. And Lisa, I'm super proud of having finally on this panel for performance testing a lady, a girl. I'm super happy. We need more girl power in performance testing. I see some people here. Woo! Yay!
She can be on the next panel.
Yay! Next time, yes. But anyway, sorry, Fernando.
All right, so I don't even know why not performance. Why even ask that question, right? Consumers expect applications to, right, run, to be snappy, to respond immediately. The competition is, we say, one tab away, right? If somebody's sitting there and it's taking 3 seconds to load something, you just open a new tab and you go to, the competitor, right? Or a different e-commerce site. Applications, if they take too long to download and install, right? You can just, I've done that myself. You just drop it, go find another one. Let me try the other one. So I don't even know why people would not be looking at the performance itself, right? And in terms of convincing upper management, right, it has a direct impact to the business, right? If your application performs well, everybody comes back to your application, your conversion rates go up, you get more users, right? And if your application is not going well, then the performance is not going well, then you have customer churn, and that has a very direct impact to the business.
I see Theron already dying to say something.
Well, I was just going to say, I agree with you, because I think it's your customers are going to tell you that performance is important, because, right, we've all heard of, we study abandon rates and things like that. I'm in the insurance business, so like when online quoting and things like that, right? We study how many quotes get abandoned at what stage they get abandoned at, right? If that has to do with performance, and it's not always performance, but if it does, you're losing a potential sale, a policy, a customer, and you get a customer in the door, and next thing you know, they're buying 4 or 5 different policies and accounts and things like that. So there's a lot at stake. To your point, there's a lot at stake. It's the business relies on the performance, and the more customer facing it is, the more important the performance is. Because again, even if you already got them in the door, if that performance isn't there, if they can't get on there and navigate from screen to screen to screen very timely, very quickly, they get frustrated, and to your point, their competitors are just a click or 2 away. That's the way
you're ready. I see you.
Yeah, so I believe that upper management does recognize that web interfaces out to customers are important, but I do think that they have a kind of different mindset on internal tools, and I've seen that before. It's just us. It doesn't matter. But if there's enough load on the system that it takes the system down repeatedly, all of a sudden upper management pays attention. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, in my experience, it usually takes something like that to get them to invest in what it takes to do performance testing for those internal facing tools, which is unfortunate, but it's the truth.
Yeah. Any other argument that you have used, Lisa, to try to? Because I know most of the time is kind of deaf ears until something breaks. Have you ever had an argument that wins them in advance? Tough. I did that on purpose because
The-
Money.
The one that I can come up with is what they'll try to argue, and I'm going to talk about old technologies a little bit. So WebSphere, let's talk about WebSphere and DB2, and you can do microservices in a database, same thing, but with WebSphere and DB2, so they would be like, well, if we can test just one JVM and we can figure out how many users that one JVM or that one microservice can support, then we just scale it up. And I'm like, yeah, but your database works differently. Oh, well, why?
that's a component part where scale that database.
Yeah, I can scale the database, but give me some money.
Yeah. And then that gets even more interesting. Some element that everyone mentions when it's customer facing. And I think that we all have heard like, it's for the employees, it's internal, what I do care. Do you see any issue with that?
Yeah,
How do you
because if
convince
it doesn't
management?
stay up where they can actually use it, if it's crashing because you've got too many users on it, well, then the tool's useless and they're not being able to do their job if it's a tool that's critical to their job. So then, worker productivity tanks, that costs money,
Mm-hmm.
then they pay attention.
And not necessarily only on situations where too many employees. I mean, raise your hand if you have been in a system that just one person and it's slow,
Oh, yeah.
right?
I've heard of it. Yeah.
No, you never experienced that?
No, not myself, but I've heard of customers that have, with 5 users. It
Where
blows
have
the
you been?
system.
You never experienced a slow system?
If it's just me logging
Well,
in,
it's hard to know that you're the only
then
one.
maybe
That's
it's
a
on
good
that
point, yeah.
environment. It doesn't have anything in there.
But you make a very good point.
I
Most of the
I was
time,
just gonna add that. I mean, it really depends on what's the purpose of the tool, who is the user, what's the impact of that delay.
but this
right?
is
even if you have like a BI tool that has to process a bunch of information and bring something back, then it's acceptable to have, I don't know, 20-second delay, 30-second delay.
you just mentioned a very interesting topic. What is acceptable? Because everyone will resemble a little everything under 2 seconds, and no, that you made a very good point. There are things that it's okay that they take few seconds, minutes, even hours. It's understandable, and some others is unacceptable if it's 1 second. But and something that you were already mentioning, Lisa, I think the system that the employees are using to do their work, if it's not performing well, why they are using that system? Well, we made an investment to increase their productivity so that we can work better internally. And if they can't, well, you're wasting your money on that system. You're losing money on the productivity. So lots of problems. And aside of you, anyone has had here a situation where you are having trouble convincing management on the importance of performance or things that are meant to be done? Okay, I see. Mind sharing?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that, most of the industries are doing with T-shaped full stack developer approach, where they say, functional performance, SRE should be all shift left. So, because we work in federated model, I think so our company works in federated model where, the application teams owns the performance and everything. So one of the big challenges that, they want to shift capability within pipeline as a code, but underneath, sometimes the data is not there. Sometimes, when you do the component level APIs or, UI level, the challenge is that, it could not address all the use cases, what the user want for the particular one. And some challenges with the downstream system, this one, specific to the rules engines and everything, is a complex because you need a big active payloads and everything. So I think that's the big challenges we have.
Yeah.
Right? So it's very tough to convince them is that, you need to have an enabler in a team who can help you and guide you the roadmap, get you the shift.
That's a very interesting approach because what you mentioned, an enabler, an evangelist, or someone that this is going to sound weird, sales performance, because or convinces people, especially management, because that's a tough challenge, right?
Part of it is also convincing people that there's a difference between performance testing and load testing
Thank
and
you.
stress
Thank you.
testing
Yes.
and all those different terms. But you can performance test a build test. You can performance test your builds. All that means is track it and fail it if it is out of whack.
Mhm.
And so API testing is my thing mostly. And so we track the performance of the APIs on the build test. And if it's out of whack, we fail the build.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to do anything with load or amount of users. Again, raising hand moments. Who has been asked to automate something for load testing, but by a single user, it was already slow. That wasn't in
Oh, yeah.
the builds, like hands all over the place, right? And that's that big confusion. Personally, I have that constant rant that performance testing is not the same as load testing. And there's a big confusion. Any of you have had that experience as well?
Not a lot. No, not a lot.
Are you asked directly what you're supposed to?
Yeah. I mean, so we work with I manage like a centralized performance test team that works with 20 different product teams. And so it's versus taking those performance people and putting them out on each product team, right? So that's just the way we chose to do it, right? I think it's really efficient that way. But I think the key is making performance testing palatable for those teams, right? They don't really want to have all the experts on their team. They don't fund them on the team. So we have a centralized pool of our test resources. And these guys know performance inside and out. They work in the tools and that's their passion. So I think one of the keys to getting not only management to support performance testing, but also to get your product teams interested is, and I feel it as my responsibility is to make performance testing palatable for the product teams, make it easier for them, make our performance testing meet their sprint timings and things like that. That makes it easier for them to say, hey, we're going to engage you early. And then as we go through the sprint, we're going to test what we need to test, what we think we need to test. But it's the product team's decision to make to test, to performance test. It may not, if you're like say, if you're making a UI change, right? You may not performance test that. But the other more complex things, those are things you need to test. And the easier we can make that for the product teams, I think it's easier for them to consume. It's easier for management to say, hey, that's working, and that the product teams aren't complaining. They're getting to production on time. We've made it palatable for them.
You mentioned something very interesting there. I would do some sort of performance measurements with UI changes, especially with front ends like Angular, React, that you can just drag a bunch of things, and it's just the front end or a configuration. And some of those components bring the whole database in a single step, and those are dangerous. Sorry to kind of debunk that, but yeah, sometimes UI can be dangerous. And the interesting one is tell the difference. Most of UI, I do agree. Like you change the color of something. Hey,
Sure.
no, not much problem.
We follow the same kind of model work. I'm from Ford Motor Company.
Okay.
We have still performance testing and load and performance testing is a service to the product teams. And the product teams can do, shift left actually using any of the tools like JMeter, right? They can adopt it in early adopters. And we have like a couple of projects, 2 times a day, code drop. And they have releases, right? So they can go with a lot of code, like maybe 5 user testing or 10 user testing.
Right.
They can understand actually how this performance is changing each code drop. Right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they have early indicators of like what they can look into that. Then they have a full-blown product performance testing by the central team cycle. That will address actually what are the concerns. Right?
Yeah.
The other thing is like if our major programs, we have a performance team member embedded inside the team so that they can do testing across all the, because it's very difficult because it is service they need to raise a request actually. The team is available. So
There are
we
some
have a different
differences.
model, how we address the problem.
I know the arrangement that you said that having like I call it, and sorry, I'm a huge Marvel geek. It's the performer supreme that goes over all the projects, and sometimes you have to send your performance champions and have them on the teams.
Yep.
when there's budget for that.
Yep.
That, as you mentioned, is very important because sometimes the teams do not have budget to have someone in place. And if this person in modern performance and practices, I like this performance engineer to teach and share the team to how to care for or be aware, as you mentioned, not only load. Then you can go back to another project and be jumping around
The
them.
reason behind that, I go with the dedicated team members, the bigger, larger program team, they have that knowledge built in that. Right. Suppose if they go with the shared model, the tester, the load and performance system, what they go for one release may not be the same one next release because they are occupied with another line. Right. So that for bigger programs, it makes sense for them to be inside the team.
Yeah,
But they are the people who are centralized team, right? They will come back once they're done.
Right.
And they are sharing the knowledge, whatever they gain with other product teams also. And we have best practices built inside so that they know what's going around, right? So that's the model it's for. But the rest of the product teams, the rest of the testers, I think we don't have a tester kind of role in our company. We used to have a quality center of excellence until 2017. We dismantled that too. We moved all the testers to the respective product teams. The quality is the responsibility of the product team, except the performance testing, which we hold outside, but we are helping them to deliver a quality product.
You're touching there another very interesting change. I don't know if any of you have experienced that, where performance testing is not anymore an isolated team. Like I used to joke that it was a basement and they throw scripts at us and we would do stuff and then send it back. Any of you have noticed some of those changes?
We don't have a dedicated central group for performance. It's done in the application teams, if it's done.
Yeah. And
One quick question: if you are doing that, when you have multiple product teams, like a bigger, larger operations like Corp, they'll be building the infrastructure, right, by the product team. It's going to be an overhead for them, right, to manage and maintain. Example, right, the product teams owns performance testing and the tools, the way how they are doing. They may be building the infrastructure across different product teams. It's a kind of redundant.
So what we're trying to do is to identify the products that are used most often, and we do have a corporate CI/CD platform. So we're trying to make it easier for them to, if you use tool A and tool B and tool C, because you're always going to have multiple testing tools, because you're going to have a UI tool, you're going to have an API tool, you're going to have unit testing tools. And if you do it right, then hopefully your API tool can also be your load testing tool, okay? Or in some combination thereof, but you're going to have multiple tools, right? So that's why I mentioned multiples. Make it easy to plug those in and to gather the numbers and store them so that it's across there, and make it easier. And that's what we're trying to do. And so we're in the early stages of that, to be honest. I'm responsible for identifying those tools and also identifying where we already have examples and frameworks that we can borrow and plug in. But yeah, it's a process because everybody, it was the Wild West for the longest time, and everybody got to do whatever made them happy. And so you end up with, a dozen different tools, and you're like, but nobody can move from team A to team B to help. Sometimes team A has a crunch, and if you could loan a few people from team B to help them out for 3 or 4 months and then take them back, that'd be really good. And because everybody's using, and that's an exaggeration, because a lot of them are using different tools, it's very difficult to loan people from one team to another and not have a huge ramp up curve. So we're trying to solve that. And like I said, we're in the early stages of that. I'm hoping that all works out. I'll let you know in a year or two.
So we are already there. Like I work here, Anime, we have close to 200 plus application assets. Earlier, we'll be similar to your model, what the gentleman said, right? We used to be shared services. Now the application to teams that want. But one of the big challenges we have to solve is that, I know like product owner owns the product. And technically at this point, majority of the product owner, except the infrastructure projects, the application product owners does not have an idea what time I have to give the performance quality attributes very important as high priority to certify its product. So there should be some sort of education to educate them, hey guys, you have performance is a key one, but the tech owner should not make a decision. The decision has to be done for the product quality.
So I'm gonna jump in that point with an analogy. When in the month or in the sprint is it a good moment to take care for your dental hygiene? Every morning, every. It's a if you dedicate a little bit of time, doesn't have to be high importance, low importance. You gotta do it. And when you convince them that it's something small, brushing your teeth, flossing, it's just a few minutes. That's it. You are done. You are performing. And another one that you mentioned, I like a lot. Cannot try to be tool agnostic because one team will have one tool, the other one will have another tool. This team programs in Python, the other team uses Java. So they're gonna be depending on the circumstance. I love that you added like some are front end, some are back end, some are even unit testing can be part of performance testing. And it depends a lot. And this is another analogy. If the team understands well and knows how to drive, if you learned in a Volkswagen Beetle, it would be the same if you change to a team that drives a Hummer. It may be a larger wheel, higher car, and feel a bit different, but you're still rolling wheels, pressing brake, gas, and turning around. Some already heard me saying that on the tutorial earlier. But that's important, and that's a very good recommendation. As long as you put information in a good place so that everyone can, it's approachable. Uh, Sugarcoat it. I thought when you mentioned that, I'm like, but that's not a good example. But you need to put sugar on it and make it attractive to your team. Um, but also at the same time there are challenges, right? The teams are not always that happy. Oh, you're bringing us another thing that we have to do. Have you faced any of those situations with the teams or seen them reluctant to these changes, this constant moving?
I think we've seen some teams that maybe at first they don't see the value of performance testing or spending a lot of time on it or investing in it. But the reality is that performance isn't just how fast you move from a screen to screen. A degrading performance can lead to an outage, right? And that's what gets the attention of product managers, executives, and things like that. If there's outages, something we use the Dynatrace tool quite a bit for monitoring and dashboarding and things like that. We want to see those things degrade to the point where we get an alert, so we know if it's going down to avoid an outage, right? But that's an easy sell to tell your executive panel. We want to avoid these Nobody likes outages. They're not good for anybody. They're tough to recover. It takes a lot of resources. So if you can prevent those, if you can see some of those coming and take the proper actions, that's part of performance. It's not just running scripts. It's watching, it's monitoring. Those are easy sells to me to avoid outages and things like that take a lot of resources to recover.
I love that you got into mentioning things like Dynatrace, App Dynamics, and that you said it's not just scripting. Because I personally, I feel that for the longest time, performance again is not the same as load testing, and was confused with it. And yes, load testing, you need scripting. You need it because nowadays you don't need it that much anymore. See, you're already laughing. And let's get into that point. Tool-wise, what new tools do you think are or you see are coming, and the types of tools? Because you also clarified very well where and for what do you need them compared from the past. How do you feel about these modern tools, these differences? Do you think they are good? Do you feel good about it? Fernando?
You guys are the experts here in terms of the tools. What I see, right, and actually just going back to your point, right, I think there's a balance depending on the type of team that you have, depending on the type of company that you have, how many products you have, where you need a centralized team to be able to do this more complex type of performance testing and ensuring that your application is not going to crash, and really being able to get in there, right, and understand maybe some of the services need to be broken down into different services and, right, database expansion. I don't know all the details of that, right? But then on the other hand, you have the individual teams who have the product managers. They understand the business. They understand what's the impact of a degradation in performance to, right, conversion rates or churn or things like that. And you can't have everything centralized in one team, right? If you're waiting for that and your team now is adopting DevOps practices, they're deploying every 2 weeks, right, and making code changes, your team is not going to be able to adapt, right, and update those scripts often enough, or you're gonna run performance testing and provide the feedback, and now it's too late and it's delaying deployments for them, right? We just caught a big performance issue, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think there's going to be a split of tools that are focused on this more complex type of performance testing, right? That can be done a little more infrequently, right? And then we need to find ways to allow the team to adopt to shift left. I hate using that because everybody uses that. But you have to find ways to, upon code changes, maybe you can run something super small that you can detect early degradations, and upon integration and moving to a staging or a pre-production environment that you can catch something there, right, with a smaller load, and then the bigger, load test in production. And I'm using load and performance here. You guys know more about it. I don't want to.
No, but you're already learning that difference. That load testing is one topic, and so my usual rant to clarify quickly for the ones that do not know, performance testing. Think of it as Microsoft Office. Load testing, Excel. Okay. If you were going around and calling interchangeably, saying like, hey, put that document into Office. I have some options, or what are you meaning? That's a confusion. Load testing is a sub-segment of the huge universe that is performance testing. And that's super important. Sorry that I had to jump on that.
No, sorry. I came to know like actually a lot of teams that they not only shift left, shift right. Are there any teams? Are there any products which you feel that they can do without impacting, production data, performance, performance testing in production environment? Are there any tools which we can safely
Okay, so
utilize in production
I
environment?
think there are some things that you can do in production without impacting production. And some chaos testing, right? You might can do some incremental load testing carefully in order to make sure that you're going to be able to support, Black Friday or Cyber Monday. But you're going to want to do that off hours and not at your critical times, so that if you did tip over the edge and you have an outage, that you can recover from it. I actually prefer to do that kind of testing in staging and make a copy of production for that kind of thing. And while I believe that there are some things you can shift right, pure load testing or spike testing or soak testing, any of those things that require really driving the system to the point that it isn't performing anymore, I don't think you do that in production unless you're doing it when you have very low loads.
I am gonna debate that a little bit.
That's fair.
I'm a big proponent of
That's
production
expected.
testing
Yeah, that's expected.
of performance. But again, this clarification, performance testing is not load testing. You can know the performance, you can trigger it, you
Yes.
can frequently test it, and you should be testing in production.
Yeah, that's
You
what
should.
I'm hearing that, Amazon does
Yeah.
production performance testing.
And okay, so remember,
Again,
performance
performance.
testing is different. I said load testing. I qualified what I said. You can track your performance and run particular scenarios with a handful of users. You can simulate users from different places in the world and see what that performance is. At that point, measuring response time is what you're doing. Okay? You're not driving a system to failure. Okay?
They're doing that too, right? Like you are talking about Black Friday and all, right? They should be doing some kind of testing to see whether the system is.
Oh, absolutely.
But in production
And I'm agreeing with him. He said not in production. And yes, I agree. You don't do your test that will drive the system to failure in production.
But you gave the example with Amazon. Amazon has so many instances per country, per city of each one of their services. When you go to Amazon.com, you never go to the same server. So they may just segment. Like, I'm gonna load test this segment of production. I can bring it down. Doesn't happen because I have these others. We are having some techniques, and that's why I was saying you can even load test without tools, just manually. Production, how? Having CI/CD, blue-green environments, A/B testing. Facebook does that a lot. I noticed that when I was younger on the earlier versions, and I would notice that my Facebook would look the same, and my brother had a new version already, and we both were being able to play. My brother was part of that green-blue testing or segmented. Put a smaller server, put a smaller section of production, and send your users. Let them test. You may not even need the scripting. So when you asked, do I need a tool or a specific, the one that absolutely I would recommend you, monitoring and instrumentation, APMs. Put them on all of your productive environments. But in terms of automation, sometimes you don't even need them. At times, if you are smart about it and leverage these new technologies, you can do it. Let your users load test your system, and you'll know what is the capacity. You want to know how far it goes? Just make it smaller. You'll find the bottlenecks, you can tune them, then put it back. But you have beta testers, users that are happy to be your guinea pigs. They will be super excited and going and slam your server. And if you monitor well, you'll know what to tune, right? And that's something mind-blowing that at the beginning, when we say any tool you want, and you can test in production, at times like, you hear the gasps all of the place, right? Have you had any experiences? I think you have played with production.
Yeah, we have. I mean, it's for the most part, it's a no because of some of the pitfalls that you could run into. But I think you have to be willing to try some of that sometimes. And to your point, if you have more instances and things like that you can work with, that makes it a little bit more palatable there as well. Again, I mentioned Dynatrace, right? We were talking about tools, and we brought that on about 2 years ago. And again, set up the dashboarding, the monitoring, the alerting, and then instrumented everything for production as well. And, then we started a cloud journey a couple years ago, just soon after we brought that on. And we were using Datadog for our cloud stuff, and then we found out we did a proof of concept with Datadog and Dynatrace, and we decided to go with Dynatrace's cloud solution as well. So now we're going down that path. We're just starting that one, so I don't really know the results and where we're at yet, but powerful tool. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, good stuff so far. Good reviews on the tool. Yeah.
Right away. Yeah, go.
Coming to the tool selections, I feel right now there's a lot of work needs to be done for the tool vendors, because the majority of the tool vendors, right, the load of performance, what a tool you name it, right? The challenge with them is that they're building the tool out of the box, not thinking on whether it fits into the enterprise or not. Fine example is that, for every large scale industry where NPI data is related, like for our company, we work under the guidelines of federal housing agents. So the data is very important for us. So what happens is that we buy any tool, the tool is good, but to adopt it, deploy in our environment, it takes 18 to 19 months. The challenge is that the X data filtrations, what it happens with the script, when it's good into the SaaS model, and also the users, we have exclusively vault them, encrypt them, using the scripts is becoming a challenge. And that's the reason, I think a lot of work needs to be in the tool vendor side. Because I know a lot of tools says that, hey, companies are driven to the open source. But the reasons we are going, because we have big open source office, we go for the open source is that because we know that we're not going to go through the pain of InfoSec. It takes a lot of time to get us, a tool in the shop, right?
That's a very thorny topic and question. Anyone tool-wise has opinions, recommendations?
I agree with that. Getting through InfoSec with like any tool we bring in is a nightmare. And again, some just not necessarily performance testing, but a lot of the tools now are putting in place collaboration abilities. So data can be sent outside the walls of your company, different email addresses. And that's creating a lot of InfoSec nightmares for me as well. But none from the performance testing standpoint necessarily.
The only question that I would ask is, has the open source tools that you're using been run through the same scrutiny that the vendor tools are? Because what I have found is that people ignore that vulnerability on the open source tools because they think, oh, it's open source, we can just use it. And they don't think about, you need to check your licenses very carefully, and you need to check, you also need to check your security stuff as well.
Yeah, we have a process of going with technical specification assessment for close to 6 months for any open source libraries. We use as a wrapper on top of it we built it. For example, we have built internally a framework which is totally not related to the open source. What we're doing is that, within the microservices, most of the performance, both the shift left, what you name it, right? The code will underneath go the microservices Spring Boot. Only for, like when you're doing an orchestration, we're either using JMeter or Gatling, or it is scaling up the infrastructure. But yeah, we heavily go through, like currently in the open source program, we have close to like 8,000 libraries, and 700 libraries are exclusively used right now. Because the reason is that it's better to build open source because our company not want any. And again, based on the subjective, right? We work with a lot of NPI data, and we have guidelines, no chart, GPT, no OpenA. That's one. So that's the challenges we have.
The one thing that I can think about is that, and you mentioned JMeter, and we're a heavy user of JMeter also, to be honest. But when the Log4j issue happened, JMeter uses Log4j, but nobody in security knew that. We knew the testers knew it, and so we raised the red flag and said, "Hey, y'all all need to go install this version of JMeter, and regardless of where you're at now, to resolve the Log4j." So you've got to also know all those dependencies down the line, and it's good that y'all do. We're just starting to get that into place. Good.
Yeah, we continuously, like even my laptops and gas machines are continuously scanned every day because we used to use Zscaler because right now, as you said, right? So wherever the Log4j version is hiding in any machines, automatically when there's a vulnerability, there's a certain time and you have to do the patching with these data. Because cybersecurity is becoming a key problem for us, especially for the federal agencies. I think this year has been the highest priority as well for the large scale industries. We always want the new tools, AI tools, but we have been very restricted by the InfoSec and we're closely working with the vendors.
In some corporate organizations, the tool conversation, as I said, is thorny because you have regulations, you have to give some specifications, requirements. But many times, even the commercial tools, the big, heavy, super expensive tools, will also come with many of those. So I think on one hand, it's probably they will give you a faster response. I remember the Log4j problem with JMeter. I think that the response was pretty quick and they fixed it up almost right away. And some of the other tool vendors, because there are a few out there for performance load testing automation that are Java based as well. And because of they are massive, it took them a little bit, I won't say names, but there were a situation all over the place. When the news for it came out, I remember like everyone, headless chicken moment, I remember noticed all over the place. So two wise in between commercial, there are other situations that you mentioned, like the tools that can do it all. And I personally have weird feelings against them because they tend to be, they keep everything inside of them. I can talk only with my other component, and something you mentioned, a key thing is that you can share with everyone, and you put sugar on it, and it's easy to access for the whole team. And if the whole team doesn't have easily access to that tool, to the results, to the metrics, it becomes that mystical, hidden, dark tool that only the engineer can use, right? So, and I'm gonna back, that generates another big problem. You already gave that example, that you become what stops the sprint. And that's a big irony because you become the bottleneck, pun intended, totally. Because we are here to clear up bottlenecks and we're creating it in the project, and they cannot release new software and they cannot do things. And we have these, if we have these tools that the whole team cannot embrace, that's also something. So it's an interesting balance.
No, but I think what you touch a very good point. Like since we have open enterprise and cloud, they always say, like, hey, when the JMeter is okay, we put, all in S3 repository. Because the private point in their repository. But coming to loader enterprise and everything, you have been blocking us. Why you not given access? Because you need to understand, like unless the person is not trained. So then can you do one thing? Why cannot you put every execution results in this three bucket? So so that's the challenge we get into, when, like they say, it seems in the cultural shift where they feel that, we are restricting them the access.
Kinda not wanting, but I know that Loadrunner, not that long ago, kinda recently, they had an Influx TV plugin or function so that you can send the results and things live elsewhere. But as well, still the scripts and some things, not only the tool, but what you use to work around the tool can get messy. And it's an interesting balance, right?
And isn't that where the challenge is? Not becoming that bottleneck, right? Because performance testing, it's going to take a certain amount of time, and your sprints run, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever they are, and not having, developing that reputation of, well, here comes performance, they're going to slow us down or make us miss our sprint date. That to me is
QA in general.
right. It starts with just QA testing, and then it seems to bleed over to performance. I think that's the challenge, because back in the waterfall days, right, when I was a test lead, we'd go through planning, and I'd tell my project manager, hey, okay, so I'm the test piece, right? Here's my test schedule. Here's how long it's going to take. But if your dev dates move to the right, and your requirements, and then dev and stuff, like, if that moves all the right, I'm not going to shorten mine at the end unless you say you want me to, and we know what's going to happen. That means low quality. That means defects and things like that. So
that's the problem right there, right? It's you actually have to lower, to shorten your part of the testing there, right?
Right. So that's why I use the word palatable. We got to make this. We have to find ways to make performance specifically, but QA generally, not become that bottleneck, and not be something that they point to and say, this is what slowed us down.
It gave me shivers to remember those times where you were supposed to be given, let's say, 2 months for the whole load testing cycle. And in real life, it was 5 days because no one would move the end date, and you were the last one.
Exactly.
And
I was gonna be the bottleneck. There's no way you're the last person, right, in the pipeline of building the product and releasing it. You're gonna be the bottleneck.
But as Steven said, right, that is true. Even for the 2 months when you execute it, right, you do not have the production defects and loss of events. Because at the end of the day, why getting the schedule of earlier days planning, test strategy, workload schedules in such a way. Because we are making sure that once it's become go live with all the toggle features now what we're running through, it is going to not yield any performance or any defects, which is going to impact the business and also loss of payments in terms of dollar values.
But very important, that was in the waterfall days. We are now to continuous agile. We have our MVPs already in production. We know that they perform, and we're just supposedly and continuously, again, huge warning to everyone. If you are not continuously releasing into production, you may not be agile. That's key. And listening back to what production tells you. If it's like, sending continuously, you never hear just rocks and above the wall. That's not agile either. So that's the big difference. And you did that question about how to make it important, or that the team knows that it's critical, or give it. Again, I would say, and a recommendation I generally give, when development happens, it's responsibility of the developer to have or update any automation and performance-related item, or chase whoever can do it. And your task that posted in your Kanban board won't be able to move until you have that paired up with your new feature, software, method, class, API, whatever you are creating. If you are not guaranteeing that it performs as you send it towards production, regardless of the pipeline or where it has to pass through, if you pair it up, you may be able to measure as it moves towards production. But and that's a misconception, because many teams are still like, we're done. Bring the performers.
Yeah.
Dude, this is the second Friday of the sprint.
I think your definition of done has performance also, right?
Say what?
The definition of done has the performance piece also inside that, right? Unless they're done with that performance piece, I don't think they go and close them, right? It's kind of, your definition of done has all the aspects, right? Whether you completed your functional system integration and as well as the performance, right? So
No, it's important. And
if they truly put together a definition of done properly, I don't think they can skip that.
But the developers who are measured on how fast they get code out the door don't even want to include regular testing in the definition of done.
And
We struggle with that all the time.
I've been on the I've been on the product management side. I've been the one who puts the acceptance criteria there, and it comes down to the sprint. It can be degrading to the developers that you go through the full sprint, so like we didn't release a single story.
no, and
Because we haven't gone to that, and then it accumulates to the next one. All of a sudden, all your timelines get pushed back. And then it comes down to how critical is that for your company, right? Maybe you skip, terrible to say that, maybe you skip on the accessibility testing. All right. I was like, what's the next one? We can't dump the functional test. Let's keep on the performance testing because we ran that last time, right? A month ago. Probably didn't make changes that would impact it, right? Start to make assumptions, or let's keep on some corner cases that nobody.
Those assumptions are the ones that'll bite you.
The pipeline is debatable because the reason I say the pipeline is debatable, right? Now we are in SRE mode where majority of performance is SLIS based. Within the JSON file, right, you put the lower limit as 3 seconds, the upper limit as 30 seconds, whereas your SLA is the upper is only 7 seconds. So technically, like you're making sure that always the build is getting fast. Somebody can mask it because the reason is that so that is always debatable. And then also the execution time for the build is they do for only 2 seconds or 3 seconds. Then within the pipeline, the data is debatable. So always it's a debatable, shift left is okay, but there are some, like toggle features when you're doing, pipeline is continuous delivery. We have seen the code which we certified, then we have issues in the production, and we closely look into the session replace with the APM Dynatrace tool. We clearly know that it should have been failed. So that's a challenge.
There are several points that you made there. I think, and looking at the time, we're gonna start a ramp down period. Again, pun intended, totally. But what you're saying, there are some activities where the team has to be careful. I like to give the example, like observability, good performance, ways to tell how it moves through the pipeline. All those elements, to me, are like the instrumentation of an airplane. Yes, they add up. They take time. You need more gasoline to fly the airplane. But I dare anyone here to get on an airplane that doesn't have that, right? And many organizations are flying blind. No instrumentation. Oh, we can skip that this time. No worries. And hopefully we're going to make it. And that as well. And you're doing the analogy with the rest of the QA components and exploratory testing, functional, everything that is around integration. I think that it's a holistic effort. The whole team should be together trying to make our software, and that the QA processes flow as well and are easy to integrate, go through the pipeline. And it caught my attention very much that you are often the product owner and you define and you decide, because we were poor developers at times. I have some empathy for them. I was a developer long ago. It's not everything their fault. They are not like, the poor guys are also like, I have this feature, this deliverable, this thing. I barely know if my code works. It works, I don't know how or why, but it's there it goes.
Or you don't know what it impacts. I just changed an API just to make it faster, and it actually causes something.
Yeah, it's faster because I deleted the database. Yeah, there are only 4 records now there, right? True story. And this is when you said that you were creating these new tasks on your sprint and putting them on the Kanban board, why do you let them pass without?
It comes down to what's important to the business, right? So I think we try to make sure that we can account for everything and do all kinds of testing and exploratory testing and all of that. In the end of the day, you have deadlines that the business is pressuring you to.
But there you did a very good point.
But somebody's going to be accountable to make some decisions. Okay, this is where we're going to draw the line. Up to here, it's not acceptable. But these other things are nice to have. We'll try next time.
Are you going to need on every sprint or release exploratory testing?
If we could, right? If we could actually have people spending time there, we would absolutely.
I would say no, because there are some changes that if in this sprint you're not touching areas, as you said, of the UI or the front end, probably you don't need that much exploratory. I mean, and that's a conversation that I think it's very valuable at the beginning of the sprint, on the sprint planning, like, hey, we're going to introduce these. We have this new requirement. What should we test around it? And I think that the story would flow or be very different if the decision, each thing that you add up as check, as pass and done, adds just a few minutes to the sprint. I mean, I may be unrealistic. It's sometimes not just a few minutes.
Yeah, I think what Fernando's saying too is, ideally you'd like to do all of that if you could fit it in, but right, that's your triangle of time, cost, and resources. And if one of those or all three of those is limited, you are forced to make choices. Sometimes we're going to have to not test this or test this less than we really want to, and go to.
And it's going to depend on your business, right? What is important to
Right.
you. Right?
No, and what you are working, because again, I do understand the wanting to do everything QA per sprint and have the full, what was the name, regression cycle, everything. But again, to my opinion, and again, personal, highly non-respectable, I think that depending on what you're releasing nowadays on your little sprint, because you don't need the whole regression. Probably you're just touching the kitchen and you're testing the living room out there far away in your application. Why? I mean, because you want to run everything, you're going to check your whole house, but you just like change the sink. Probably so silly.
And just to clarify, I wasn't saying that we wanted to do exploratory testing.
No,
we
no.
actually never did exploratory testing or performance testing.
Oh, that's also.
What you said, everybody facing the room.
I'm sure, yeah,
The
I'm sure.
challenge, I think the challenge is that we not put the risk there, right? Yeah, we have to shift to the market because we have the guidelines for losing the business. But at the end of the day, the issue happened, the virtual issue. How many people spend time in the incident? Then, for example, we run a blameless Fridays, we run correction of errors. So many people have to come. And they found out, the developer does not know this was a real use case. He thought it's an edge
Right,
case.
right.
So that's the way the risk we have attached is that because I think we are very bad in right now in companies where we are not in a position to convince the management, hey, if you go with this one, it is a risk, and this is the trade-off, and these are the items, you'll be spending more because every labor is counted, right? The mean time to detect, the mean time to resolve, then how retrospective ones. So we have gone through all this, trust me, not only before.
It's interesting because we are having so many dilemmas, different perspectives and ways of doing things. And almost always with performance testing, it depends. And that's the most frequent answer that we give, because we have different circumstances. One time it will make sense, another won't. Some others you'll be safe, never exploratory testing the application. And there's no golden rule. But just doing a quick pause. I'm going to give some opportunity for the rest of the audience. If anyone wants to pose a question, do you have any difficulty that you would like us in the panel here to discuss? What's the situation? Yep, I see. I'm going to repeat it so that, because probably I won't be able to hear. No, you weren't? Okay, I thought we were having a hand. Anyone? Any more questions? Yeah, please.
How do you push back against leadership or decision makers who say that poor performance in lower environments doesn't really matter because it doesn't act like that in prod?
So you need to capture that history. And if you've been capturing that history and you can show this performance in dev equals this performance in production, and all of a sudden it does this in dev, then you can say, okay, it's going to do that in production. And you can prove that correlation. What you've got to do is start tracking those times in the lower environments, so that, and that's what I call performance testing. It's your build test that you're running in the lower environments. You track that performance so that you can say, okay, I was having 5-second response time. Now I'm having 20-second response time. That's going to increase your response time over here, even if it only increases it, 15 seconds and doesn't quadruple it. It's still bad.
Did you ask management having a meal, a taco like we just did, and you put a tiny little bit slice of habanero and ask management, how did you feel? Well, production is getting a can of it. So that difference, if it's feels a little bit spicy behind here, there is 10 times, depending on the size and the amount of activity that you will see. And it's very important for me to, management often says like, yeah, it's only one user, there are not that many in pre-prod, but as you very well said, as it moves towards production, it will start growing, has more dependencies, there are more data in the database. I mean, we can list lots of possible things that can make it slow. and I don't know, scare them. I mean,
Yeah.
they are gonna unless you. But that's the risk of being like a Chicken Little, always running.
I mean, the other thing you could do is actually show data on how much cheaper it is to fix a issue, right, during the coding phase than the testing phase than the production phase, which is what 10x for each, typically, right?
Something, real long. The other thing is I would never take a single build and start raising alarms about it. I would rerun that build or rerun that test outside of the build process and say, okay, was that a blip that was caused by something external in the environment? Or is it or is it systematic and I see it every time I run? So I don't take a single test that's increased and start calling Chicken Little, to somebody's point. I rerun that test a couple of times because one good run, well, that could be the blip instead of the other thing, right? So I rerun it 3 or 4 times so that I start to see, is there a pattern that I can then start to diagnose? And then you usually, if you've got monitoring in production, you probably also have monitoring in test. Look at where the slowness and see if the slowness is consistently different in the same component.
Have it in test as well. Very important in all the environments, have monitoring. I would love to have more questions, where we are getting to the end of this panel. The discussions were heated. We had several intense moments, but I hope that we answered. If you have any questions, let me know. Leandro Melendez on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, all those things. I'm sure all of you may be happy to answer some of those. And thank you very much for coming. It has been a pleasure to argue in front of you. Thank you. And thank you all also for coming to the panel.
Great discussion. Great discussion.
Give the feedback.